Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to TDX and to this presentation. So today I'll talk about org security fundamentals. My name is Neha, and I'm a part of application security team at Salesforce. So let's start with a forward-looking statement. Please do not make any buying decisions based on this presentation. Make all your buying decisions based on the features that are currently available. OK. So quick note about who I am. I'm an application security engineer at Salesforce. My basic job responsibilities are making sure that all the vendors and applications that we use within Salesforce are secure. So that includes all the third-party vendors and app exchange packages that we want to use internally. And as a part of my job, I also look at different orgs that we have internally and make sure they are securely configured. So you have been hearing a lot about what an org is. Let me give you a brief background. So an org basically is an instance of Salesforce. So you go to login.salesforce.com, you type in your password and username, and then you log in, and you see a white and blue screen, which is basically an instance of Salesforce that has been created for you guys. So when you log in, you see the accounts and objects and opportunities. So that basically is an instance of Salesforce, which we call an org. So we all are here to learn about security and talk about security, but why is security important? So these are a few points, just a tip of the iceberg, but high data sensitivity. So the information that is in your orgs is highly sensitive. So you have your sales information, your financial information, maybe information about your employees, or all sorts of that information, even your accounts and leads, which is very important for your business, right? That's why it's important to make sure that orgs are securely configured. Second is possibility of data breach. So we know hackers out there are scanning our internet and looking for anything that they can hack into. And given the reputation and the data inside Salesforce, it is a target for hackers. And lastly, security is everyone's job. So I'm an security engineer, and most of the people here are either developers or Salesforce admins. And that's why it's everyone's job here to make sure that the org you own or you're responsible for is secure. So before we get into Salesforce security in general, let's cover basic principles of security. We'll cover 3 principles here. OK, so the first is CIA triad. So the basic 3 principles or pillars of security are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So let's just cover these 3 quickly. Confidentiality means that whatever data that you want is sensitive to you is secure, and people who want to access that information should have access to that information, should be able to access that information. Integrity basically means that we shouldn't allow people to edit information. We should make sure that the information within your org is as you want it to be. We don't want any unintentional changes to the data within the org. And availability basically means that the people who need access to your org or the data within it, or whenever they want to access the data within it, should have access to it. The data or your org should be available to the people who want to access it. So these are the 3 main pillars of security. And whatever decisions we make as security engineers or developers or admins here in the room, we should make sure that our decisions are based on these 3 pillars of security. OK, second principle, which is a very important principle, is defense in depth. So let's take example of this house. We all have houses, and we have multiple security controls within our houses, right? So we have a fence, which marks the perimeter of our house. Then we have front gate with locks. And then we have alarms, motion sensors, and cameras for monitoring our houses. In the same way, we should make sure that we should have multiple security controls within our orgs as well. It's safe to assume that any security control can fail and will fail at some point. That's why it creates a need for multiple security controls, because one security control can fail, but it's unlikely that multiple security controls will all fail at once. And the last principle is least privilege. So least privilege basically means that people who have access to your org should only have access to the data within the org if they require that access to do their business duties. And why I'm talking to you about this is you might argue that, hey, people in my organization have access to this org, and I trust these people. But based on the statistics, 53% of the global data breaches in 2017 came from within the org. So I'm not saying that people within the orgs are malicious, but we are humans, we make mistakes. So we can be negligent users, we can make mistakes, we can copy-paste sensitive information from orgs to somewhere else. That's why we want to make sure that if a breach happens because of malicious insiders or people making mistakes, we should keep it to the bare minimum so that we can reduce the impact of the breach. So these three principles of security are the ones that we have to keep in mind while making any security-related decision within the org. Now let's talk about these three principles and how we can implement these in terms of a Salesforce org. The first one we're going to talk about is user and access management. So who has access to your orgs? You all have orgs, and who has access to your org? Maybe people within your team or people within your organization. But in today's day and age, it's very common for people to move from one company to another, from one team to another. So a person today who needs access to your org might not need it tomorrow. Suppose they move to a different company who's your competitor. What in that case? That's why it's very important user provisioning, deprovisioning. So how user deprovisioning works, once people don't move to a different organization and don't need access to your org, you have to remove them from your org. They shouldn't have access after they're done with their jobs. The best way to do is to keep in touch with the HR folks from your company and make sure that people who leave your company are deprovisioned from your org. And what is SSO? So SSO is a single sign-on system. So there are multiple products available within the market which supports SSO, which is one single tool that supports multiple apps. So you can sign on to your SSO, and then that will lead you to all the apps that you should have access to. So once you leave your company, you should have access to SSO, and thus you won't have access to the org itself. So Salesforce supports SSO, so you can look into that for your org as well. So let's see how you can deactivate users after they move to different roles or different companies. So as you can see, there's this active check marks on the right-hand side. You can edit your profile and remove that check mark. So once that is removed, the user is deactivated from the org itself, and they won't have access to your org. So we just spoke about who has access to your org. But once they're logged in, what kind of data should they have access to? That is dominated by profiles. So suppose you have salespeople within your team, and then you have finance people within your team. The salespeople need access to the sales data. Finance people need different access, which is to the finance data. They shouldn't have access to each other's data, right? So in that case, you can create different profiles for different kind of users. Pick a group of people, like salespeople or finance people, and create profiles for them. And then again, as I spoke about least privilege, make sure that the access that you're giving to a profile, for example, a sales profile, make sure the access you're giving to them is based on the principle of least privilege. How you can do it is based on CRUD and FLS, and we'll talk about it a little more detail. So let's take an example of this spreadsheet. Salesforce database doesn't look like this, of course, in clear text. But for the sake of example, let's try to understand this. So the tabs in the bottom, contacts, accounts, opportunities, and lead, these are the tabs here in the spreadsheet, but these are objects within your org. So you have contacts object, accounts objects. Then the fields here, or the columns here, are first name, last name. These are the fields in your org, or in your database. And the rows here are called records within your org. So how do we manage access? So who has access to different objects is decided based on CRUD. So you can go and set the CRUD permission. Suppose a person only needs read access to an account, to the account object, you can do that. And FLS, as the name suggests, is called field level security. Suppose everyone has access to contacts within your organization, but maybe they don't need access to the mailing street or mailing city. Then in that case, you can just give them access to the first name, last name, and title. So you can decide who has access to the object, and then you can also decide who has object to these particular fields. That is done by FLS. And the last one is sharing. So suppose we have contacts. Everyone has access to the contacts objects and all the fields. But suppose a salesperson is working on few of the contacts and he's not working on the other one. So based on sharing, we can give them permission to view only certain records, and we can remove access from all the other records. So for example, I'm in finance team and I need access to the first 5 people within this object. I can do that with share. How to give CRUD permissions to objects, as I was talking about. So you can go to profiles and give basic read access to accounts. This is just for the sake of an example, but you can decide which access is given to which profile here. OK. Now that is done. Let's talk about two-factor authentication. In today's day and age, remembering all the passwords that we have is not possible. So what is two-factor authentication? We all use passwords to log in to our social media accounts and as well as Salesforce accounts. We want to make sure that the passwords we use are secure, but passwords right now in today's day and age is not the best way to do that. That's why we go to two-factor authentication, which includes something you are, which includes your face reading or iris scan or fingerprint, all the biometrics, something you are, which includes password or PIN code, and something you have is something that you have in your hand, which can be similar to a physical token or Salesforce Authenticator, which is an app created by Salesforce for two-factor authentication. So for example, in terms of your orgs, it can be something you know, a combination of something you know and something you have, which can be go to login.salesforce.com, and it can be your password plus use Salesforce Authenticator. So you're using 2 forms of authentication in order to let people inside your org. So how to do that? You can go to Setup and create a permission set, turn on the feature that says two-factor authentication for user interface logins, and add to the profiles that you want. Suppose you want all your finance people to have two-factor authentication, you can add it to their profile, and once they try to log in, they'll be invited to set up their 2FA. Now suppose you have turned on the 2FA. Now the salesperson is traveling, and their laptop gets stolen, and their phone also gets stolen. So suppose the password is stolen, as well as the second factor of authentication, which was their phone, that is also stolen. What can you do in that case? IP whitelisting comes to the rescue in that case. So what is IPs? It is a unique address given to your machine when you connect to the internet. And that has a geolocation tag to it. So suppose you want all your salespeople or your finance people to log in via VPN or your office address. You don't want any other people to log in from any other IP address. You can add that. So you can add IP login ranges to the profiles, and you can add it to all profiles, including API users and integration. So Salesforce will basically know from which IP address your requests are coming from, and if it's coming from an unexpected IP address, we can actually block them. We won't let them access your org. But one important thing to consider in this case is enforce login IP ranges on every request. If we don't do that, IP is only checked when they log in. Suppose their iPad or their phone or their laptop is stolen and their account is already logged in. What in that case? Because IP is only checked in login. That's why you enforce login IP ranges on every request, so that the person who has access to the org from another location tries to press the home button or the app launcher, that request won't go through because the IP is not what we expect it to be. So that is something to look into. Last thing that I want to talk about is health check. So how to access health check? You can go to Setup, Settings, Security, and Health check. Or you can go to Quick Finds and type health check. So what health check basically is? So from Salesforce, we have created a security baseline for you, which is the basic minimum required suggested security controls that we think are good for you as a customer. So we compare your security posture of your org with this baseline that we have created, and we give it a score. How it looks is something like this. So you can see your score, whether it's good or bad, and then you can see all the settings that are enabled. If they're not enabled, you can go to the edit section. It will take you where you can turn on the setting, and that is way to turn on the setting and improve your score. So this is an example of how the score looks like. It is possible to edit the custom baseline as well. You can create your own baseline, but we always suggest you to go higher. Like, don't remove the required security suggestions, required security settings, and bring the level down of the health check. We would suggest you to, if you want to edit the health check or the custom baseline, add more security features to it. Make it a requirement for everybody who's using your org to increase the security requirements of your org. So let's see how these scores work. Excellent is 90% and above, and very poor is 54% and below. So if it's very poor, that means you don't have around 54% of the required security controls. And if it's excellent, it means you have 90% or above of security controls, which is excellent. And as Salesforce customers, we suggest you to aim for the highest possible score, which is 90 or above. And we will suggest you to go, turn on as many security features as you can, because it goes back to the term defense in depth. We want multiple security controls to be turned on within your org so that we have multiple defenses, just like the house example we were talking about. So let's talk about the key takeaways, what we have learned from this presentation. First thing, as security engineers, admins, or developers, the first thing we have to do is go back home and run health check on our orgs. Make sure that you have a good score. If you don't, go ahead and change the settings within your org. Try to improve the health score. Turn on IP whitelisting. If you think you expect customers or people who are using your org to come from a specific IP ranges, add that to your org. There is no reason why people from unexpected IP ranges should be able to access your org. Turn on 2FA. Look into products like Salesforce Authenticator. There are other products as well in the market. You can use them as well. Turn that on for all the possible profiles within your organization so that people will have two forms of authentication, which might be password plus something else. And last is develop a plan for user and access management. As we spoke about least privilege, we want to make sure people who should have access to the org have access to the org. And people who have access to your org should have access to the data that they should have. They shouldn't be given any extra access at all. Let's talk about other resources that we have. So there are two trails. One is develop secure web apps. If any of you here is a developer, then this is a great trail to take. It is on Trailhead. And the second one is protect your Salesforce data. It has more details about what I just spoke about, the health check, IP ranges, and things like that. So that is a great trail to take if you're an admin. Within the security booth for demos, so we have a security booth upstairs, and there are demos for health check. If you want to look how health check works, how IP ranges work, we have people from our team who are giving you demos for security for admins as well as for developers. And the last is capture the flag. So we have a sort of a game upstairs. You can go and do all these things hands-on. So if you're a developer, we have an insecure org for you, and you can go there and actually turn on the security features and make it more secure and see the health score going up. So that's all I had. I'll hang around here for some time. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Or if you have any other questions, there are security experts upstairs in the security booth. They'll be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.